friends, and welcome back to the Golden Bird Reads channel. My name is Emily, and this is where I love to talk about cozy, wholesome, sweet books, often with a dash of romance, and pretty often vintage. Today I have 10 books that I wanted to share. See if I can show you the stack without conking the baby's head. That I think are really fun books to read for autumn. As you can see, I have a special guest here. This is my baby. He might make some baby noises throughout the video, but I'm a stay-at-home mom, and being a mom is my #1 job. So there might be sounds. Let's dive right into it because I want to try and keep this a little bit on the shorter side, but we'll see. I like talking about books. So I also have a couple books that I don't have the actual physical copies with me because I lent them to my sister, and so I haven't gotten them back yet. But the first one, I should say my criteria is it's either set in autumn, they're kind of mysteries. I have a couple of mysteries in here, school settings, cozy, that sort of thing. I also have some middle grade books in here. I have not set these in any specific order. These are just all the books that I'm recommending. So, to jump in, The Woman in White. I read this book 3 years ago, maybe now? I think it was the first year after I got married. And so we've been married for almost 4 years. So I think it's been about 3 years. And I fell in love with it. It is considered, I think, like one of the original or first thriller mystery novels. It's gonna be so much fun editing to see if I can hear him making cooing noises while he sleeps. But yeah, it's a really, really good story. I have a really hard time talking about it without spoiling it. So if you like very atmospheric, old manor houses, a lot of it, or not a lot of it, portions of it are written in like diary format. It's so good. I love it so much. I'm really glad that my husband wasn't really thinking he was going to read it, and so I was able to just tell him the entire plot of it. So good. Highly recommend it. It's very perfect for this time of year because, like I said, it's very atmospheric. A lot of it is just kind of, I wouldn't say gloomy, but like moody. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. But yeah, I highly, highly recommend it. It's probably about time for me to do a reread of it. And this particular edition I was able to pick up on a beach vacation with my husband's family. We went to a couple of bookshops, and I had just recently finished reading it, and I loved how beautiful this copy is. The print is pretty small, so at some point I will probably get another edition that's a little bit more readable, but it just looks so good. That's book #1. Now, the next 2 books are kind of, they're related, so let me just tell you about them. Let me actually set these other books down before I have a book avalanche. There we go. So, Daddy Longlegs and Dear Mr. Knightley. Daddy Longlegs is written by Jean Webster. I think it was written in either the 50s or 60s. I can't remember for sure. Maybe earlier than that. It's the story of an orphan girl she's not really adopted. She is sponsored to be able to go to school. And it's written in I struggled with this in my last video, but the epistolary in letter format. It's written in letter format, and it is just one of the sweetest books that I have ever read. It is very cute, very wholesome. I will say, if you're not a fan of age gap romances, this might not be the one for you, but I love it. It's all about Judy, and she's going to school, and she's been in a very poor orphanage, and so it's like all these new experiences that she's having, and it's just very charming. And also this edition is adorable. Like, look at this lady's outfit. It's so cute. I love it. So, highly recommend this one. I recommend it because it's starts with Judy going to college. Like, that's what it is. I'm doing a terrible job at explaining this. She is sponsored by somebody, she doesn't know who, who they're paying her way through college. And so one of the agreements is that she has to write letters to them, kind of keeping track of her progress through college. There. So it's kind of back to school, like all those vibes. And then Dear Mr. Knightley by Katherine Reay is a modern retelling of the book. And this one, definitely, I would check out trigger warnings and things. It mainly has to do with like the foster care system. Those are the triggers, and some of the rough things that some of the different characters go through in foster care. But it's what's the main lady's name? Samantha, that's what it is, Sam. I've read this book like 3 times, I think. It is so good. Like, there's parts of it that are hard because the main character, Sam, has gone through some hard things. But I first found out about this book when I was kind of going through some tough times in my life. And so I think that it really stuck with me because of that. And then also it, again, has a very sweet romance in it, and it's written in letter format, and I just love it. So there's an old professor character in here, and he and his wife are just so charming and lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed it, hence why I've read it more than once and bought myself a physical copy of it. Yeah, it's really good. There's those. And then the next book this was a childhood favorite of mine. I have read this book many times, and I might need to reread it again this fall. It's Understood Betsy by Dorothy Canfield Fisher, and this is about a little orphan girl. She's been adopted by her aunt, and she lives with her aunt in the big city, and her aunt is very like protective of her and has like very... I guess she doesn't really know how to change her adult life to adapt for a little girl. And so Betsy lives a very, not child-friendly life. Like, she and her aunt, like, love each other. They get along super well, but her aunt has all of these, like, rules and things, and she's scared of things. And so then Betsy kind of gets scared of like, dogs. Her aunt's scared of dogs, and so Betsy's terrified of dogs. And she'll only, like, let Betsy have, like, a tiny cup of milk or whatever, because they're living in the big city and the expensive things and stuff. Well, then, I think what happens is her aunt, I think it's Aunt Harriet. I think that's what her name is. Is that what it is? I don't remember. Anyway, she has to go away for some reason, so Betsy has to go stay with some of her other family who live in, is it Vermont? Yeah, Vermont. And, Aunt Frances, that's what it is. It's not Harriet, it's Aunt Frances. And her Aunt Frances has always talked kind of poorly about these other cousins up in Vermont, and so Betsy is like terrified. Well, it's Elizabeth. She's not Betsy until she gets up into Vermont. But then she goes there, and they're on a farm, and it's just... oh, it's so nice. Like, they have a dog, and they have a farm, and she's able to be like a little girl and like run around and do stuff, and then she actually has to like do chores and help around the house and dress herself and like all these different things, and her whole world is shifted and changed, and there's bits where she's in a one-room schoolhouse, and it's so lovely. There's another section where I love to do a lot of sewing and knitting and crafting, and so when I was little, there's one section where she and a bunch of her little girlfriends that she meets at the school, they're all sitting around sewing doll clothes, and it's just... I remember just being so happy about that when I was a little girl, because they get down her aunt's old doll that has like all these fancy beautiful clothes and things, and I remember being a little girl and reading that and just being so amazed by it. So highly recommend it. It also has a very autumnal cover on it. But yeah, there's a bit where she Betsy has to help with making applesauce, and ever since then it made me really want to make applesauce. So last year I finally made some applesauce. So easy. You make it in the Instant Pot. It's a piece of cake. But I think that was very fun. A very fast and easy read too. Okay, the next one we have a murder mystery. I couldn't let this go by without recommending one of my all-time favorite authors and series, Miss Silver series by Patricia Wentworth. This is one of the books in the series. It's The Chinese Shawl, and Patricia Wentworth wrote the Miss Silver series, and it's about this older lady who used to be a governess, which is now turned private investigator, amateur sleuth, and she always has some form of like a sweet romance that's part of the story, and usually one of the characters is suspected of the murder, and so Miss Silver has to come and get them off. And I just thought I'd recommend this particular one. This was the first one that I ever read. I heard about it from Miranda Mills, and absolutely loved it. So, highly, highly recommend this. The next book here is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society book by Mary Ann Shaffer and Annie Barrows. I love this story. The story is about Juliet, who she ends up, I'll just read you the little blurb on the back. Writer Juliet Ashton receives a letter from a stranger, a founding member of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and so begins a remarkable tale of the island of Guernsey during the German occupation and of a society as extraordinary as its name. She gets a letter from a guy on the Isle of Guernsey, and she's intrigued. She's like, why was your book club called the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society? And so she starts writing back and forth. They're writing letters back and forth. It's written in the letter writing style, and I mean, the reason I'm recommending these books is because I love them. I love them so much. It's so good. Highly recommend it again. It's very cozy, wholesome, got a little bit of romance in it because that's usually a criteria for books that I love. And it's just wonderful. And there is a Netflix film adaptation, which actually I saw that before I read the book. I hadn't really heard of it until I saw that film. And it's pretty good. It's actually quite close to the book. I think they got rid of a couple characters. They changed up the ending a little bit, but by and large, it's actually quite close to the book. So I do highly recommend that as well. It has Lily James and I don't remember the main actor dude. It's really lovely. You should read that one. And then I wanted to quickly, before I forget to mention them, the two books that I don't have the physical copies of. The first one is, let me look at my list here, The Mistress of Mellyn by Victoria Holt. And honestly, pretty much any of the Victoria Holt books that I've read so far, they're all very like Jane Eyre-esque, in like they're very moody, like they're very, as my husband was describing, my mom asked me, you know, what's a Gothic fantasy, and like an old Gothic fantasy, which is Jane Eyre is kind of considered, or is considered a Gothic story. And my husband described it as broody. And I was like, that's a perfect way of describing it. They're very broody books. They're just very atmospheric. They're really lovely. The Mistress of Mellyn, I think, is honestly, if you like Jane Eyre, you should read The Mistress of Mellyn because it has a lot of the same things. Like, young girl comes to old old house to be the governess for single guy. He has a daughter. In this one, it is his daughter. And there's all these mysteries surrounding like what happened to his wife, and like it has a lot of similarities, I find, to Jane Eyre, which, if you're not familiar, is a book by Charlotte Bronte. If you haven't read Jane Eyre, highly recommend it. Perfect autumnal book. So wanted to mention that one. And then the other one is Nelly Dean. I cannot remember the name of the author off the top of my head. I'll put it on the screen. It's a retelling of Wuthering Heights, which is a book by Emily Bronte, and it's told from the perspective of the housekeeper, and oh, it's so good. I love it way more than the original Wuthering Heights. It's just, oh, it's so good. It's a very, again, moody, like, mysterious, like, oh, how do you describe it? It's really, really, really good, and I was just fully engrossed in it. I need to reread it because I haven't read it in a while. I love it. It has such a good, sweet, happy ending, and like, because the thing is if you're not familiar with Wuthering Heights, I honestly find it like a little bit of a depressing book. Like, a lot of really sad things happen, and like the characters are often like kind of sad. There's a lot of those like melancholy tones to the book, Nelly Dean, because it's based off of the same story. But it just has such a redemptive, sweet ending, and I loved it. I can't say much more than that. Highly recommend it, especially if, again, you liked Wuthering Heights. Give it a shot, because this is one of those books that it's so funny, I almost never do this, but I was in the library and I saw it and I was like, the cover art drew me in. I was like, oh, this looks kind of cool, and then I read like the blurb. I think it was on the dust jacket on the inside or something, and I was just like, that sounds kind of cool, and I took it home and I was just like, I read it and just loved it. So wanted to mention those before I forgot, and then I've just got two more, which I'm going to try and quickly talk about here. These are, again, old classics. This is another one of my childhood favorites. I had to mention this one because if you watched my 10 books to read in spring video, I had mentioned The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I actually had a perfect summer book to recommend by Frances Hodgson Burnett. But that video didn't get made. Had a baby, like I mentioned in the last video. So I thought I would recommend one for an autumn Frances Hodgson Burnett book, and it's A Little Princess. I always like lose track of it and think that it's The Little Princess. A Little Princess. This was one of my childhood favorites. I actually still own the copy that I had, that I was given. I think I was given it for either my birthday or Christmas. I still own that copy. It's so good. It's about a little girl named Sarah. I always second my guess myself. Yes, it's Sarah. I should know this. She is left at a boarding school by her father, and she's a very wealthy little girl, and so she is treated almost like royalty at this boarding school. And then I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. Does it say it right at the beginning? Okay. This is, then one day, Sarah suddenly becomes penniless, and now she must wear rags, sleep in the school's dreary attic, and work for her living. So that's what it is. She's really rich, and then all of a sudden she becomes very poor, and so she has to work in the orphanage, or in the boarding school place, but she basically uses her imagination to make up stories and kind of make life a little bit more palatable, livable, if you will. And I love it. I love it. This has been a firm favorite of mine ever since I was a very little girl when I read it for the first time. And I'm super happy that I actually own this edition, which is illustrated by Tasha Tudor, who is one of my all-time favorite illustrators. Her artwork is just stunning. It's so beautiful. So I'm really, really happy that I have this book. But yeah, let me see. Oh, wasn't really paying attention. I didn't realize there were full. I thought it was just the small, like, chapter heading illustrations, but there's like the full illustrations. It's so beautiful. Anyway, this one is a very cozy. There's a lot of, like, you know, stormy weather descriptions, and it's cold, and she has to live in this little attic room, and all those sorts of things make it very perfect for this time of year. And then the last book that I have to mention is one that, again, I'm due for a reread, and I genuinely think is one of the best books that's ever been written. It's Persuasion by Jane Austen. By far my favorite Jane Austen book. This is the story of Anne Elliot, and years ago, before the book started, she had fallen in love with young Captain Wentworth, and but her family disapproved of it, and so she was convinced to break off her engagement with him, and so he went away very upset. And then the story starts with her family they have overspent their budget by a good bit. And so they're having to retrench, which is what it's called. And so she's leaving her family home. They're going to be renting it out to somebody else. She has to go. She goes and stays with one of her sisters for a while. And then her father and her older sister, who is unmarried, they're going to Bath. And she has to join them there. But the person that is renting their home is the sister of Captain Wentworth, and so he's kind of brought back into the circle and brought back into her life, if you will. And it's just, I think part of why I love and appreciate this book so much is because it's about like second chances in romance or in love, second chances in love. And I had a second chance in love in my life, and it has been lovely. So I highly recommend it. It is one of the shorter Jane Austen novels, so it's a relatively quick read. But yeah, those are all the books that I have to share with you today. My battery light is flashing, so I'm going to try and end things here quickly. I hope that you have lots of wonderful, cozy things planned for this autumn, and I would love to know what books you're looking forward to reading. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.